All right, hello and welcome everybody to a special edition of the Fundication Show. We have an exciting guest for you here today who spans multiple industries. So not only is he in real estate, but he spans other passive industries as well. He's a all-around entrepreneur and also leads others in that charge. So Paul Graham, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, I mean, excited to not only be here, but really just our conversation when you were on my podcast and just getting to know each other, providing good insights to people for them to just take action on what really aligns with them. So
Absolutely. And so what I'm going to do to start this episode off is I want to share Paul's bio, and then we can kind of pick that apart and go in whatever direction this seems to go. But Paul H. Graham is a serial entrepreneur with a proven track record in home services, software, and real estate industries. Through his brand, The Investor's Guide to Joy, Paul empowers investors to pursue a life of joy led by their financial heart instead of their logical minds, leading to better investments and a more fulfillment. Paul leads a mastermind community of heart centered business owners who unlock exclusive tax strategies, business funding, and investment opportunities to increase their income and impact. As an investor and fundraiser, Paul focuses on luxury short term rentals, oil and gas ventures, and emerging alternative investments, creating wealth while living a life of joy. So, Paul, love the bio. Tell us where this all
hey,
started. How did you get into the world of being an entrepreneur in the first place?
man, so the first story that I can remember, I was maybe like 8 or 9 years old, and watched, different infomercials of as seen on TV or things like that. And for whatever reason, I don't like Tootsie Rolls. Like I think they're terrible. But they have those flavored like Tootsie Pop sort of things. And I was like, oh, well, if you take those and put those in water, then you extract that flavor, and then you could have that as kind of a juice, and maybe you'd want to drink that juice. Don't it tastes terrible. But it's meaning to say like I was very inventive and curious with things. One of my most favorite stories that my mom tells me is that she worked a lot, as well as my dad did. She was in education, principal, if you will, right? So long hours and encountered a lot of traffic. And so I would take my little Hot Wheel cars and would like put them in a line, and be was like, "Hey mom, this is your car, like all the way back here." And one day I'm gonna invent a car helicopter so that way you can like fly home and get faster, back to kind of me, the family, things like that. And was very privileged where my mom really supported that sort of investor entrepreneurial type mindset. Where I actually tried to apply for a patent when I was about 10. And by try to apply for a patent, I mean, my mom took me to a patent office. I shared a couple ideas, and they said, great, like in order to go down this process, it's probably about, 10,000 or sometimes like $40,000. And I said, okay. So then I turned to my mom and I said, hey, mom, like we need this much in order to make this happen. And so I've always been, again, that kind of inventive, curious type kid who then, growing up, then turned ideas into companies or really just ideas into learning opportunities, right? As an entrepreneur, not all the things that we do become a business, or we may not want them to become a business. Or maybe they do become a business. We want to sell them off or get rid of them or just be like, take this problem away from me. This is destroying, my life, or I just don't like it, or I don't want it, or things like that, right? So it's certainly been with me from a young age. You mentioned, different industries and things I've done. But I mean, real estate's a big component of that, in a lot of different aspects for me. Just love looking at office buildings. I like the analysis of it. I like working with people on it. Certainly, there's tax advantages as well as growth opportunities through forced appreciation or through natural appreciation. And it's kind of the financial, I don't know, mindset I have. So it's been, and personality in some ways too. So it's been good. I'm also wearing an EBITDA shirt because I think it's funny. So yeah, world goes round.
Yeah, love it. Very cool. Where did you grow up? What was the schooling like? And at what point did you shift from, or did you ever end up in the real world or I shouldn't say the real world, but the world of being an employee and shift into, let's call this the real world of being an
Yeah.
entrepreneur and creating value?
Yeah, so I grew up in Denver, Colorado area, Centennial specifically. It's like a small suburb of Aurora. Spent most of my life there, moved to Austin, Texas, in 2019. Moved to the Woodlands for about 6 months for a job opportunity, and then moved back to Austin. I actually just moved to Nashville a couple, months ago, and there's been, kind of some stories around why I've moved those times strategically or things like that. But this, aspect of if I've been in, this world or that world, things like that. Oftentimes, I believe that people who are at W-2 formal corporate employment are looking at the entrepreneur or the business owner as like that grass is greener sort of stuff. And needless to say, I've constantly gone back to W-2 land, is at least what I define it as, actually to one, skills, two, potentially equity, and three is also cross collateralization with income, right? So if I'm making that good salary, I keep those expenses low. That then allows me to do this, right? I can reinvest. I can maybe hire someone personal for personal kind of virtual assistant work, or maybe even business work too. If I have this idea and I only have so much, time in a week, if I'm able to hire someone or several people to help grow and scale that, that then allows me to do multiple things at once. And whether I'm like formal W-2 as listed on, my tax return, or it's like my own company, it's just been part of the process. So I should probably go back and like really count, but it's probably been like 4 times that I've gone back and forth. Main thing is after college, went to real estate, commercial real estate deal management software platform. I then went and basically was able to become a co-founder of a software company. I thought I was going to go into commercial real estate. I ended up doing that, sort of instead, after I was in commercial real estate. And then, just kind of have gone back and forth from, W-2 and my own ventures. Those ventures predominantly have been, like you mentioned, home services, that software company I was in. Again, I was a commercial real estate broker for a bit. Really found that I loved investing and being more on the fund side as well as the syndication side than necessarily the, hey, Bobby, want to buy this multifamily property, like back and forth, da 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 kind of stuff. Just like, heck no is the way that I really approach that. So it's more of like a perspective again of like those three things I mentioned of like what it kind of gives and does, than necessarily, if it was this side or that side. And I also just say that as like a point of healing in people that I know that I've talked to, where it's like, oh, it's definitely this, it's the worst or best. It's like being an entrepreneur, like it's Elon Musk says something to the extent of like it's like willingly like chewing glass or something like that, right? And that is definitely a piece of it. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. Last thing that really comes to mind is just the idea of being an entrepreneur also then by my thought has just been trying a bunch of different things, either businesses or business type activities for that business or that industry. And really just that cash flow or that security is extremely helpful with that job, to then again launch off that. And again, to my comment, or the kind of the brand idea of joy, like, I mean, and sometimes it's just been like a necessity of like, I'm burnt out. I need to take a step back. And through that, I'm then able to do this and this and this, right? And that's even beneficial for fund managers or syndicators as well. Hey, I need stable income such that I can make the best decisions for myself and my investment partners. I talk to a lot of syndicator fund managers specifically as we raise funds for oil and gas because they're like, hey, this multifamily property we want to sell or maybe need to sell, or like maybe I need to sell it, right? Just so I have enough cash. Um, but really we shouldn't, right? And so it's like, okay, well, let's take a different approach. Like how else, and so for those who have high incomes, they want to save on taxes, they're maybe investing in oil and gas, they're getting that offset, but they're also then getting that cash flow and then they're making better decisions, right? So I'm viewing it more as like a decision sort of piece than necessarily like it's good or it's bad, because all good things are beneficial and I want to focus on the best. And that's been really rewarding for me, sometimes being in companies and learning like, wow, this is how a process is made, or this is what the hiring process is like, or this is what the firing process is like, or new vendors, or this and that. That's been exponentially more helpful to actually raise funds. We ran an oil and gas company that's, we helped them raise about 200 million. Again, me being in commercial real estate, being in that has really helped me with a number of aspects too. So, a couple thoughts coming to mind kind of around that topic, but it's certainly an important thing to recognize the context of those things as well. And, just been my journey. So,
Yeah, and I love the way you articulated that, and you could see even me in the beginning, like I grapple with this of like there's this traditional sense of people think that there's one or the other, right? And in many cases it does feel very different when you're a traditional employee and you're essentially adhering to what other people are telling you can or can't do versus an entrepreneur where it's you kind of have to go against what people say you can or can't do and make your own way. But there is a blend of both, and there is pros and cons to everything involved. And quite frankly, I've met over the last few years a lot of amazing people that used their W-2, especially if they can get a high earning W-2 income, to really set them for a lifestyle that is much less stressful, let's call it, than somebody that is
Sure.
always operating, that is always out there, kind of chasing that next deal and moving things forward. And it's put me into a position of perspective for myself of understanding why did I get into
Mm.
real estate in the first place? What attracted me to it in my early teens? And it was the passive nature of it. And so to realize that there's many different pathways to get to that passive nature is really important. And there's many things that the traditional banking system is really set up for people that have a W-2 income, and it could
Yeah.
unlock options for you that you may have a much tougher time getting access to if you've strictly
Right.
been an entrepreneur. And especially it like me, for much of my career I was a solopreneur, which is very
Mhm.
different and
Yep.
very much more difficult to get things approved on.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings up an absolutely excellent point. There was a time when so that Woodlands job. So I basically purchased a couple short-term rentals, was furnishing those, put on the backs of credit cards and strategic leveraged finances. I got a call from a former coworker who was like, "Hey, would you consider moving to the Woodlands to help me build out this company and our software products and things like that?" Yeah, I'll consider it, right? Again, ended up going there, for 6 months, became a consultant and went back to Austin. But that income then helped me purchase another short-term rental a couple months later. And then I also extracted and did a personal loan. That personal loan had, helped float me for, the rest of that next year when I kind of the consulting engagement kind of, went down. And, kind of just doing business stuff, trying to figure things out, have it scale, things like that. So it's absolutely advantageous for an income perspective, as well as, yes, to your point, lifestyle perspective. When I was able to, I mean, not to say I couldn't when, I was just doing kind of business stuff either for myself or as I've joined a company where, we have the oil and gas ventures and alternative investments that, I'm personally doing with Investors Guide to Joy. But like going to Greece for a week and a half, just, pay time off, like, man, that's good. And those tickets were purchased with points that I had from furnishing the short-term rental. Like, man, that's good. And so but for myself as well, unmarried, don't have children. That's also another factor that I've seen where it's like, hey, that health insurance aspect. So it's more again of like, how can you strategically do it? There's a bookshelf off to my left here that one of the books is called Be Your Own VC. It's a very, software type of book, but it's again that aspect of like take that, 100, 200K salary, live still at your means, that maybe 70 to 100 kind of level, have that ability to invest, get that, free money with, different kind of water flow methods of financing and things like that. But as you have that high income W-2, then again, investing in things like oil and gas and most real estate opportunities give that. It's also not proven. So 1,000,000% talk to your CPA professional and ensure if you are investing in a fund or syndication that those will be able to be passed through just as a TBD, just because I've seen investors be like, oh yeah, like the fund manager said I'm going to get offsets. Like, okay, well, what does your CPA say? Oh, I haven't talked to them since April. Okay. Meaning to say, like, you're able to keep more of that from that W-2. So it's not just, oh, hey, I'm making that 100, 200, but I'm actually kind of keeping that 100 and 200, right? That really, again, helps set the stage for, to your point, that foundation to even do things that come back to your platform and say, hey, like, I don't want to have as much risk or as much kind of due diligence in what's out there. I really want to, save time, get great, equity options and have a good understanding of what I'm doing. Great. I'm going to come in and see these different opportunities and have those investments that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to do because they're, guaranteed, if you will, liquid capital because it is a W-2 piece, building up that investment pipeline. Ideally, again, my brand is the aspects of investing in things that align with your life and not just making a bunch of money that cause a bunch of chaos that you feel very frustrated with. And then you don't hire anyone, and then you don't ask for help type stuff, right? But those things really then help bring those right investments that give you that equity, that cash flow, and that tax offsetting in those pieces. So very much encourage it for different situations and not having shame around it. I think that's kind of a challenge sometimes of like, oh, I can't do this or that. There's a guy who has probably done six different software startups and has done an IPO with one of them and a number of other different accomplishments, and he just loves building things, right? And so it's also to say, like, who are you to say, to your point, like, you are or you are not like someone within a company, right? Being able to say, hey, I'm the type of person who likes to solve problems, help people, and be compensated in value because of that. That then is just a precursor of then who you work with. Like, there's incredible people in this world that do have amazing companies that are well managed and well funded and have good insight and have good, kind of work life balance boundaries, right? There are many others who don't, and it's challenging when you're forced to stay in some of those roles. A quick story that's coming to mind is that whenever I was in the role in the Woodlands, right at that point, again, had some passive, cash flow, income, things like that, and I was able to firmly say, hey, us building this mobile app is not beneficial to the customers, to the company, or really like my own time. Well, actually, I really love building stuff. So sure, I'll go build something. But the challenge is there wasn't a big enough problem to do it. And so me talking to the CTO and the CEO to effectively verbatim, I said, hey, like this isn't going to do well. So there's two ways to have something not do well. You build it and it doesn't do well, or you don't build it and you just like throw the money away, right? And you just invest, you put it somewhere else. Well, you have my bank account info, right? Because I work here. So like you could also just send it to me and you could have the same results. They laughed. I was jokingly serious. But it's that thought to say like that I was able to do that and say those things, granted we had a good relationship, things like that, because that was the best thing that we could do. And I would also say that individuals who maybe are in a W-2 or again want to have that best W-2 type job, solving problems, helping people, things like that, having that passive income really gives peace of mind for when you can't find a job for 6 to 8 months and you deplete your savings, right? Or again, just waiting for the right opportunity or having that right opportunity come to you, as well as I believe in those actual roles, be able to say, no, like this is the right best path to do. It's a little scarier. It's maybe more unknown, but ultimately, this is just what I believe from my experience or with data or things like that. And I think that's really important because it really allows us to play on our edge and to our intuition. And as humans, I also believe like if we aren't playing to our edge or to our intuition, we're kind of shutting down a little bit, right? It's the same thing of when you don't follow through on the promises that you make to yourself. You slowly get a little off. I mean, sometimes even get into depression. I've had, and I say that from doing like 75 hard and the Live Hard program and things like that. Like when you don't follow through with the promises that you say to yourself or what you can do, it just eats away at you. So again, having some of this passive income or just net worth or access to that net worth, again, I believe just allows you to be your true best intuitive self, not just, hey, I only have 6 months saving, like hope this works out. Like I personally have seen myself and other people again play so much differently in terms of their mindset, in terms of their actions, in terms of how they show up in the world, even though business may not be booming, right? But it's just more of that heart posture, right? Which is very important to my brand and myself, as well as just the types of things that they're maybe investing in or thinking about or things like that. So definitely, important things for people to consider and kind of reflect on for sure.
Yeah, I love it. And we're talking about a lot of things that are very personal based. So otherwise, to sum up what we've talked about so far, it's like use the tools and the different income sources necessary and build a plan around it. So use your W-2, use your investments, use your
Right.
entrepreneurial business building, and think through the ways that you're going to move through those stages. Let's shift a little bit and talk about capital raising because I know that you had mentioned
Yeah.
you've raised a couple $100 million for some of your more recent project. This is something that
Yeah.
PREIshare has actually gotten into for many of the syndicators within our platform. They saw how
Mhm.
well we did with outward marketing for our own fund, and so some guys raised their hands and said, "Can you do that same thing for us?" And that's basically spun off to now we have an LP leads program where we provide accredited investors to those looking to raise capital for projects that are 506c or at least some sort of a designation that can be publicly advertised.
Sure.
And for you to be able to raise a couple $100 million, and I don't know if that was on your own or with some teams, that's a great feat. I'd love to hear a little bit about that
Yeah.
process and why you think you were able to do that.
Yeah, so not myself. I've also gone from a mindset perspective of me to we, and even from a faith perspective of he, like what is he calling me to do, right? What can he accomplish? Because there's this idea of like hard work equals success. Just for us talking, right? Maybe this happens, that happens, then boom, like you raise a $50 million fund, right? I'm glad we're talking about this too because I got hit with a Facebook ad with one of the things. It's like, oh man, that's great. Two great people there because I know one of the guys who's funding it. But it's to say that like so a couple thoughts coming to mind to kind of break it down of sorts. It's to say like, where are you getting the leads? What is your offer? Are those people targeted, right? And that's just kind of the basic stuff that I think anyone would really go to. But I think the difference ultimately is systems, right? Oftentimes for newer fundraisers, it's this idea of like, oh, I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to go talk to people. I'm going to build my lead list and I'm going to, execute on this one property I had. I'm a big advocate on this to say that like you should not one do this yourself. It's a disservice to yourself as well as investors. So get someone who has done at least two full cycle deals. I actually don't invest in anything that does not have a lead partner who does that, but I also see in the management team like what they're actually doing. I love education and want people to try new things and become their best versions of themselves. But what I'm putting 50 to whatever amount I might put into a deal with a bunch of new people, who don't have full life cycle experiences or who aren't like professional capital raisers. I personally just don't do that, right? Again, it's kind of like a risk tolerance, sort of piece. Um, and we've seen that certainly within multifamily the past couple of years. Those systems are mainly around that, marketing piece. So, doing SEO, doing paid ads, being strategic on who and how you're talking, right? But it's also working with, collaborative partners, right? So within, my community, we have wealth managers, we have tax strategists, we have some broker dealers as well, simply to say like I as an investor then have some of that insight and access to those pieces, to those things that I otherwise wouldn't have. So when you're going about and raising, it's the aspect of man, a lot of thoughts. What type of fund size you have and who your ideal target is, and then going around that, building those marketing systems around that, and then just expanding on what's working, right? Certainly, the past couple years in some ways have been relatively easier to raise money more than anything. But from a software standpoint, this is a big thing I learned building software. There's a difference between pain and discomfort, right? So if I'm going to someone and say, hey, would you like to make, 1.8 equity multiple, with this multifamily property, things like that. Sure, maybe I could be interested. Send me the deck, whatever. Hey, you're currently paying about $100,000 in taxes each year. This opportunity allows you to offset that completely, as well as give you 15 to 35% cash flow, right? Annualized returns. That's, at least oil and gas specifically, and certainly multifamily and different things have their different tax saving advantages. They're kind of all over the board, I found. But it's to say like that's a pain, right? Like, whoa, you can help me take this away. And from that, I can also then get some sort of aspect to it, right? It's not just, oh, I buy the, 6,000 pound car, use section 179, and then really I just have another, space in my garage that's filled up, right? Not a big advocate of that. So
I'm going to be doing a
having
video on
those,
that because I just did Section 179. I bought a new Tahoe. So, but there was a
Really?
lot of thought process that went into it. There was a lot of
Sure.
factors that I had to think through of like, okay, giving up. I'm going to be selling a car that has a pretty low payment right now. I'm going to be getting a higher payment. What is the actual tax offset? And it's promoted so much out there. And I'm sorry to jump off on this
Oh, go.
tangent right here, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's promoted as if you use that and it just gives you a free car, and that's not the case. And so you have to think a
Yeah.
lot about that. So the worst case scenario is what you're saying when people buy a car that they don't even need.
Mhm.
And you think about the fact that, yes, maybe let's say you spend $60,000 and you end up saving ten or $20,000 on your taxes. What would have been the difference if you took that $60,000 and invested into marketing, right? And grew a much bigger business. So there's so much
Yeah.
thought that should go into any tax saving strategy. And I'm just going to anchor on one other thing that you mentioned is, newer capital raisers. One of the things that we do when we take on anybody within the ecosystem of PREIshare is they have to go through the sponsor approval process. And we actually look
Mm,
at
okay.
their track record. We do background checks on all of the, primaries involved in the business. We want to make sure that we're dealing with good players because unfortunately, if you get a bad player and we help promote their project, it
Sure.
harms the industry as a whole, not just the people that got involved in that project, not just those who were near and around it, but everybody in real estate and everybody in capital raising in general in private markets. It's already so looked down upon in many ways because people are trying to point money towards the stock market and other traditional money paths. But there's
Sure.
so much within the private market investments that are exciting, and so we got to keep good players in that space.
Yeah, and it's a big piece too because ultimately that they're seen both as investments, right? Think the stock and the alternative investment, but ultimately that stock goes down 5%, 20%, like whatever, right? Oftentimes with the investments with alternative investments, it can be that equity multiple piece or it's zero, right? And so that's a challenge to be like, hey, I lost 100 grand, and going through that. And so there are additional due diligence pieces or aspects kind of to it. This is something again with my brand as it relates to both the investing and kind of the car piece we just chatted about, and it's the aspect of your financial heart, not just your logical mind. And so what that's defined as is like logical mind would be like, hey, I'm going to invest in this, put 100 grand in. It's a 1.2. Let's low. Let's call it 1.5. Then from that, I'm then going to go buy the car that I really, really want. And then I'm going to take the rest of that and then I'm going to, invest in this. And like, this is a 5 year plan that you're trying to justify to yourself that it works today, right? Like 5 years, there's going to be so much that changes. So oftentimes I've found, and this is me being like Strengths Finder 2.0, my top skills analytical. So this is coming from like analytical type person, love Excel spreadsheets. That those aspects we really justify to ourselves and don't really potentially think through like, do we actually need this? Do we actually want this? Like, what is this helping me do? Do I really trust and enjoy and appreciate the individual sponsors and the project itself? Or am I just looking at this as a money piece? And if it completely goes down to zero, am I going to be so mad, frustrated, et cetera? And it's going to take me potentially longer off the path than it would be if I just kept the money and stared at it for 5 years, right? As it relates to Section 179, the additional aspect is this. Imagine then that, Tahoe or Suburban or whatever the 6,000 pound car is, that's then again, in your garage, right? Sure, you need something to drive. You kind of justify it based on this and that. But it's the other aspect, right? Of imagine you're that W-2 person, and then you are trying to justify the fact that you are doing a kind of using it for business expenses, right? Of 50% or more. Okay, so then are you going to Turo it? Are you going to do this, that, like kind of thing? And so it then just turns into an absolute hassle cluster, right? Because then it's like, okay, well, the wife and the kids and the travel and the things, but no, I got to do the legal right best thing within the taxes and reporting to the IRS and using it to these things. And it's like that's way too much mental headspace for me to even personally, at least right now in this, moment or this year, for me to give it a second thought at all. I personally don't give it a first thought. I also love my Forerunner, lifted it, put really cool decals on it and stuff, but it's just to say like it's again at what cost. And I just have found personally that oftentimes as investors, especially in the alternative investment space, it's like understanding what that would actually feel like. Okay, great. So if I pictured myself having that vehicle, like what would a day in the life of a person with this type of vehicle that changed this, changed that be like? What if, that opportunity needed a capital call? What would that be like? Do I have additional capital to invest? Statistically, or from a wealth manager type standpoint, you should only be investing at like 10% of your liquid capital into deals, which is another thing that I personally find part of the reason also why I have the community, that aspect of really just understanding of like not what necessarily what to invest in or how to invest in or why you're investing it, but also like if you should, and not just because of the deal, but because of like the liquidity and the access and the potential that you have. I've seen some who just can't make the capital call. They get into that deal, but they can't make that potential capital call. It's that thing of, if you can't afford it like three times over, like don't do it sort of thing. Again, it's again a logical, sometimes ego-led thing of like, no, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. When in reality, you really could, right? But also, should you? And that's why, banks and other financial institutions have those limits of these different ratios and perspectives. So that way we don't over leverage ourselves, or more importantly, we don't over leverage future economic conditions, right? Because today we could be good, but as things change, like, do we still have the same liquidity? If we, unfortunately get laid off from our job, do we have that accessibility of, income, things like that? Because even reverting back to Section 179 type conversation, if my payment increases, oh, hey, that's fine. I got my W-2 job or I have some, whatever, right? But as things maybe move or change, that $300 a month versus that like $1,100 a month sort of thing, right? That drastically changes how you vacation, how you show up, your just stress, right? Makes it more difficult to start a business. And so having those, expenses offset, it just really help you live, I believe, a better, different life. A thought or a kind of conversation piece from Alex Ramosi came to mind where it's the aspect of like, if you're going to pay more for anything, maybe pay more for like rent, not necessarily like a house, but like rent, right? So that we are around some of these people, high net worth type people, that could make sense for a short period of time, right? Taking on that like level of risk. You having that car, could that really help? Now, if it is a sports car and you go to the meetings, I have never met more men in my entire life owning a motorcycle and owning a sports car that have high net worth. Like it's literally a business card, right? That makes sense. That's not typically part of Section 179. I believe the electric Porsche fits that. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's the only kind of sports car that's like 6,000 pounds. But said another way, it's what does it also give you? It's not just what does it initially give you, right? And so those things, what that lifestyle impact or other things are additional things to think of outside of, oh, the numbers work. Well, the numbers work today, but like also how does that impact this other stuff? Because then that also impacts your health as well as your family, as well as just your mindset, things like that. And I just believe that's not, worth it.
Yeah, no, and I love that we're on this conversation because I've thought about how do I bring this up and make it real for people so they think through all of the perspectives of it and make that
Yeah.
decision in the proper way. And it took me a long time to go through all of this just because of the different aspects. For me, it was about peace of mind, right? So I had the rear end of
Mm-hmm.
my last truck that went out on me, and it was a $4,000 expense. Now I was writing that off. I'm in real estate, so most of my
Sure.
miles
Okay.
are
Yeah.
already business miles. So I'm writing it off by the mile, which is great, and that works out well. But now that it's outside of its warranty, those bigger costs are not a write-off to me. So
Yeah.
by choosing to do the Section 179 and sell the old car, that
Yeah.
opened up the opportunity where not only could I take a huge, tax benefit for 2024 because I did it right at the end of the year, which I needed, thankfully. But on top
Yeah.
of that,
Yeah.
now my tax write-off turns into actual expenses, right? So anything that comes
Mhm.
up with this new car, including the fact that when I bought it, I also did the 6-inch lift and the 35-inch tires and the wheels and all the things that I would
Nice.
want to
You
have
do
in
the
that
spinners
vehicle.
too for the
What's
for
that?
the wheels? You
No
do the
spinners,
spinners
no
too?
spinners, no.
No spinners. All right. All right. Good to
It's
know.
much more off-road capable than what spinners could do.
Cool.
So, really
Yeah.
fun car, and it was a fun choice because now I didn't have that thought process of okay, I'm at $130,000 or 30,000 miles on this truck.
Sure.
What's next, right? So now I have a car
Yeah.
with a warranty that's built the way that I want it, that I get excited about driving. And on top of that, I have the
Yeah.
peace of mind of not worrying about whether that car has an issue, and I also get the tax benefits in the process. So I thought it through,
Mhm.
strategically, but I've
Yeah.
seen too many people make that decision without thinking it through, without thinking about the soul side of it. Like you said, if it's just the
Yeah.
numbers, and especially if you've got the numbers wrong, not a good decision. And then,
Yeah.
the other thing that you were jumping into is about how you make your decisions in what you invest and how much you invest. I actually just sat down with a couple this last week, and they have an inherited retirement account, right? And so over the next 10 years, they have to deplete that entire retirement account, and they're being told that there's all these rules. So they're thinking, do we just keep using all of the rules within how to invest it from a self-directed retirement account,
Hmm.
or should we just take the tax hit now and then go do what we want with it because we want to buy an investment property that our son can live in and help manage and teach him the skills. And so when it really came down to it, when we talked about the benefits aside from the immediate taxable numbers that they may take a dip on, the
Hmm.
overall upside, it made much more sense for them to just get it out of that restrictive policy and go put that money to work and earn a higher return, and also hopefully inspire some some things within their son to help him step up
Sure.
in his responsibility and otherwise.
Yeah, I mean it that I love that story because it's actually the inverse of my own experience. So the my debt to income was, tapped after 2020 because I bought, yet another property. And I learned about short-term rentals, wanted to, do all this stuff. The shortest version is that I asked my parents, hey, could I use your debt to income ratio to purchase this property such that I could get the cash flow, you could get the tax depreciation, and when you want to, you can come to Texas at the time they were living in Colorado and use the property, right? What ended up happening is something that you can't put it on an Excel spreadsheet, and that's the impact you make to your life and other people's lives around you. And that is simply to say that, like, I've seen my parents smile more in the past. So I was 2021, 4 some odd years, right? That I have in my entire life. And I have photos of my parents like smiling now. And I say that just because my parents like work themselves to the bone. They're in their early 70s now. And they've just always been grind, 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 go, 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 right? But that ability for us as like a family to, hey, which couch do you think I should get? Or like, what do you think about this wallpaper? Stuff we would never have talked about ever, right? I grew up in a white like house. Actually it was a white house, but also it was a white wall, like everything. There was no color or decoration anywhere. Like it was mainly maybe a carpet, right? um and that is just such a powerful, incredible, amazing thing. And my dad the other week, when I saw him, was just like talking to other people, and he was like, yeah, like, it puts me to work, and, I don't get many breaks and whatnot. But no, I've like really actually enjoyed it. And I talked to him. I was like, I hope you don't really actually mean that. I don't ask my parents to help me with, any of my properties, but like we had the most wonderful Christmas ever. I got this 12-foot tree as we were setting up one of the properties, and I volunteered to be the one to put the Christmas ornaments on, right? Which did not happen any other point beforehand, but it's like those memories that are so impactful. Granted, yes, the numbers work, so this wasn't just an emotional like let's connect as a family and then like, have to sell the thing, right? But it's the aspect of inviting people along the way. And so that's one thing that's like very important to me as I've done 75 hard, as I've done these different investments, again, as I've also done this me to we type thought. It's like, how can we do this? Hey, I'm doing this. Do you want to come along? And even the same thing in terms of social media. Hey, I just, did this. This was very exciting. Cool. I have someone who then, reached out about that or had that conversation, right? That's really beneficial for fundraising, right? As we can kind of see, connect those dots. Hey, I just helped someone offset their $50,000, tax bill, and they da 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 kind of stuff, right? But I'm just a big believer on sharing those experiences, that insight, that perspective, those opportunities with people, as well as even just like, hey, do you want to come over to my, property? We got a hot tub, and I built a miniature golf course outside, which, truth be told, that also had some like child like healing in a lot of ways. Because again, parents were very like this, nothing else. Like maybe we'll bring candy to the movie theater kind of thing. Not even like get candy at the movie theater unless I personally made enough at a lemonade stand, then maybe I could get, those cookie dough bites. Meaning to say there's so much more impact that we can have with real estate. And one big change that I had mentally in 2023 was the idea of investing for community. So oftentimes in the multifamily space specifically, we look at properties that are devalued, that we take over, that we renovate, that we hit that ARV. We probably kick everyone out for the most part, raise rents because it's so improved, things like that. But it really impacts that community, right? And so it's the aspect of in what way can we serve the community, and not just raise rents the highest and best, but also have people be long-term, tenants and create, 98%, retention of tenants and be more involved in all these aspects where it's like being more human than more of an investor, if you will, and how those can coincide, and offer those different opportunities or experiences for people. So that way, it's not again just about the numbers. It's also about that human piece. So that's been really cool for me to see again personally, right? Also with my parents and how they're thinking or even just investing and just to be transparent. Like again, my parents were like uh education and then like national security type stuff, like straight arrow, no risk, no nothing, right? Great childhood, but just in some ways, like no little room for fun or entrepreneur, which is kind of ironic. I am an entrepreneur, but I also just saw them not do those things that I became the opposite. So real estate, I believe, has so much more impactability beyond, again, just these kind of dollars and cents. Even with your platform, and that's part of the reason why I also wanted to reconnect and help support you and the team there, simply because like we talked about on my podcast, like oftentimes people when they're selling these in the secondary market, it's because of some sort of life event, right? Unfortunate, but we all know we're going to go through some sort of life events. Hopefully, it's just a natural event, not a forced event, but that aspect of being able to essentially help someone so that they can live a better different life when they're experiencing that unfortunate thing to come in. That's a win-win in a lot of aspects, a win-win-win, right? Because it also is a benefit to your platform and a testament to what you're doing. And that's just really another reason why I love real estate, because it's not just that there's so many more aspects to it, that I think oftentimes as people invest more or they kind of get into this space or they start fundraising for this space, we sort of lose that. And it's like, hey, someone stuff's in that storage unit, not just, oh, it's been there for 2 days, like, but really bringing that aspect to it. And that's something I've also been doing more with my Airbnbs instead of being like automated message, da, 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 make sure you lock the door. Hey, like what would give you a 5-star experience? Like, what are you coming for? Like, that's so exciting. Like, are you excited to have a family reunion that you haven't had for the past 10 years and you're celebrating my property? Like that's amazing. They're like, yeah, it is amazing. It's like, yeah. So just to share some thoughts that come to mind that like from that story, that it's like it again, not always about the numbers, and your financial advisor or planner, if you have one, again, that's not something that they can really advise on, but it's something you should be aware of.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm going to unpack a lot from what you just said because it brought up a lot of things in my mind as well. And I'll take it all the way
Cool.
back to I remember the first time I was flipping a property, and three of the neighbors came over at different times and thanked me for improving, that home, right? Because this home
Mm,
was just an eyesore and it brought a lot of the
sure.
wrong kind of people into the neighborhood. So sometimes we don't think about that. And I think about now some of the syndicators I know. There's one in particular that's been in the news multiple times for the impact that they've made in the community through the
Mhm.
different multifamily projects that they've bought. And I think about some of the self-storage folks know now that are doing self-storage conversions that are taking these Kmart's or these old rundown buildings that are again an eyesore,
Yeah.
and they're turning them into something that is now it doesn't attract those people that hang out behind the abandoned building anymore, right? And you have better
And it may
security and
give
just
them
everything.
jobs, right?
And
The
yeah,
the people who are
exactly.
behind the door. Yeah. Yeah.
And providing jobs and all of those. And that's, something again
Yeah.
with, like you said, with PREIshare, the fact that I'm able to create something that gives people liquidity where they never had it before. And many times I mean, now that I've been able to talk to some of these people, right, and hear their stories of why they're looking for liquidity, it's really a big deal. And when we think about that, of that bigger picture and the bigger aspect of why we're doing what we're doing and what it actually does, besides just the financial aspect, I think that
Sure.
we can attract more folks. And when I talk about attracting more folks, the last thing that you brought up is that automated process. Unfortunately, I see a lot of people because we're in this incredible world where you can have online systems that bring in leads. That's what we're helping people
Yeah.
do, is bring in leads of complete strangers that are now interested in learning about your project and whether they could invest in it. But then I start to
Mhm.
see people that rely so much on automations that those people are going to feel like a number. And it's a constant training on our end when we take on a client of, can you commit that you're going to reach out within a certain amount of time, that you're going to actually get on the phone with these people, because nothing beats it. And we're saying that because we want it to be the best experience for them and we want them to succeed in their project, but we also want it to be the best experience for that investor, because again, we're protecting the industry as a whole in everything that it is that we do. And so automations are great. I don't think they should be relied upon. And the more personal touch, and when we can get in somebody's world, the better success we're going to have overall, in whatever aspect of the journey that we're in.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've one big way that because I've done, let's see, commercial real estate sales. I've done like fear-based sales with life insurance. I've done like solution selling, like all these different like types of sales, right? The biggest thing I found is the ability to be of service, and that service is really easy to stay in that sort of mindset and that aspect through education, right? If I'm looking at how much I'm going to make from this deal, things like that, like I'm in a very sales outcome based type, right? Success equals hard work. But if I'm more in education, it's to say like, okay, so you're coming today because you want to see how either you're going to take that tax advantage or tax hit now, or in the future, like what would the trade-off be? What would life look this way, that way? Like, what are you most concerned about? What are you curious about? What do you not know? What are you scared to ask? What do you do not know to ask? What do you know already? Like type of thing that I learned, through product management, that now as I bring into fundraising, it's to say like, I don't want just any dollar, right? It's the idea of like bringing in dollars that matter for the impact of them of like, whoa, I just helped this person, save on taxes. And because they save so much on taxes, they're actually going to take additional funds and, donate to the LA fires, right? And I say that because it was a conversation I had a couple weeks ago. Typically, we're spending about 100 to 300 grand in taxes for the past like 5 years. And it's like, what do you like? Do you not know options? Or like, no, what do you know? It's like, what do you mean? What do I know? What do you not know? Type thing, right? And so there's this aspect of like, as we increase our income, we can also increase our impact. And that impact can be with time, it can be with talent, it can be with treasure. And so the ability to have some of these aspects really like coincide, I think are absolutely incredible, especially as we're, fundraising and again with education. Clearly, well, maybe not clearly, but I kind of took that from my mom, right? Where it's like, hey, let's educate and inform. And certainly your platform's focused on real estate. And we've been doing fundraising for oil and gas. But what I've realized is like no one really knows oil and gas, or it's not very like marketed or understood. So I made an ebook on that, right? And multifamily is pretty well known in the grand scheme of things, personally, because well, not personally, but it's like statistically, it's the most or biggest asset class, right, within commercial, right, greater commercial type topic. But then people also live in an apartment, so I'm just going to be honest. Most people think they know it, right? Less people have self storage, so they're like, well, they kind of know it, right? But what about hotels or even hotel conversions, or there's even like battery plays, or there's a number of different alternative investments that I have access to or understand or know or learning, where it's like when does this make sense? This is a specific equity multiple type of play. So when you're looking for scaling, this is a good one to do. But keep in mind capital calls. So you need to have even more capital to put behind that, right? Typically multifamily play, so that ultimately people are more aware of their options, and it's no longer just, hey, I met this person at a meetup and I really like them. I'm gonna invest in their project. And I say that because even though that is possible and there's great humans out there, again, it's the idea of like, what's my boundaries? Have you done two life cycle deals? Like, are you a full time in this, or are you just passive? What's kind of your income sources? Transparently, I go through those conversations because again, I've had fundraisers be like, I think I'm going to sell this project even though we really should sell next year. And it's like, so you're going to convince everyone to sell just because you need to like make enough to travel and stuff? Like, I mean, it's a reality, right?
Yeah.
And so having those sort of aspects are important. And when you're getting these organic leads, having that understanding and benefit of education, because two things. One, as people get to kind of the closing table, they're more likely to close because it's their decision. It's not you convincing them, right? I say that from personal experience within commercial real estate, had some of those where just, yeah. And the other piece is like you're truly helping them, and then their magnifiers of you, right? They're able to say, hey, this person helped me solve this piece. You should talk to them as well, right? Those referrals start really taking off. And that in a lot of ways is also how we built those marketing engines to help raise that 200 million. Dedicated, kind of fundraising team to, coincide with SEC, rules, laws, and regulations is a big piece of that as well. With the marketing. But again, that education piece is the best thing. And what comes to mind to like specifically talk about that is it's not just every single salesperson needs to educate. There's this idea of doing like a video sales letter or have people, hey, I'm interested, watch this video, get educated. And then if this is still of benefit, then book a call, right? Type process. That's also been a way that we've really been able to scale because we know specifically how we're helping people. They're ready to go right now. They have a specific problem. Let's do it instead of as kind of and I don't want to use the word salesperson because it's also technically not SEC sort of compliant, but like as a, co-GP, right? That would be someone who would then be able to leverage their time the best and say, hey, if you're curious or you want to know, here's a podcast. Like go listen to this, right? And leverage our time. So that way we can help the people that need help right now instead of just the people that are curious. So just kind of a system thing that I thought about from kind of earlier that we were talking about to again help educate people with that process. And so now on my website, my plan is to go through every different type of alternative investment and give that resource contact education sort of piece, not because I raise funds in all of them, but simply because to be of service. And that way people again are making the right decisions and have the right expectations and not just, oh man, guy from real estate meetup, person online seems really great. It's nice. Like, let's do it. There's no problems here. And it's like, well, did you read the PPM to understand what the capital calls are? Or, capital calls are a big thing. So I keep reiterating them, but a number of different aspects, or even when it's, paid out, is it quarterly? Is it monthly? Like, all these different things that newer investors really need to pay attention to. Last year specifically, there was a lot of data on who was predominantly investing in alternative investments, and it was new investors. So as the social medias of the world give us access to raise through these social media platforms, that then means that people are just not going to have the best understanding, which also means for you as a fundraiser, what does that mean? Well, that means that you're probably going to have to jump through more hoops to help people. But the other thing is like if you don't, investor relations, I mean, SEC compliance, depending on stuff, right? These things will not only bite you in the butt, but will also potentially put you out of business and also potentially bankrupt in some cases as well. So this isn't just to help people because you should help people, even though you should. But there's also these downstreams impacts that I've seen doing investor relations and doing these other things that if you don't, I mean, fundamentally just change the issue. And if you're a long-term fundraiser investor, relationships change the game. So who you are today magnifies and causes downstreams impact. So that's another way to if you're really going to go about raising capital or even just investing too. Things to like really keep in mind again, why I'm so passionate about this idea within this in terms of like joy or investing for joy, your financial heart, not just oh, $1.2 great Excel spreadsheet. Like here's money. Like this isn't a stock, right? You could lose your entire piece and potentially have to do more. And that could really cause issues for yourself, your, marriage or your family type things. That's just not something that I believe people should really play with. And we don't have enough education, I believe, on things holistically. Not everyone's doing what you're, kind of talking about of making sure we're good stewards with the information as well as the finances too. So.
Yeah, and so many people don't even read the PPM or the
Mhm.
subscription
The long
document,
document. What do you
let
mean?
alone take the time to understand it, right? And so I think through that, and this is something we're dealing with on a constant basis because when we take on a sponsor, then we want them to at
Yeah.
least signify that they will allow liquidity, even though liquidity is limited based on the laws and
Sure.
how it comes about. That they're not building in more restrictions for their investors into their documentation. And so, we actually give them some example verbiage, to just instigate that to make them and their lawyers think about how they're causing more restriction for that investment that doesn't need to be there because the law doesn't,
Sure.
cause it to be there. And so, man, we unpacked a lot. We could probably do this for another 2 hours, but I want to make sure that we
Love
are
it.
respectful of the folks that are on with us. We ought to do this
Sure.
again sometime, but in the meantime, Paul,
Yeah.
how do people get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to learn more about your podcast, your community, and anything else?
Yeah, so my Masogi is defined as like an annual challenge that you're potentially likely to complete, is doing 100 YouTube videos in 100 days. So starting kind of middle of February, I'm just going to be, talking about different things, kind of personal life, but also finances or diving more into some of the things that, we've talked about. So that's one way to like, take in information that will also be put on, podcast version as well. My website, The Investor's Guide to Joy, is certainly like a place, and from there you can go to different socials or whatnot. But one thing that's really important to me is just like in the age of AI and consumption, I love talking, meeting, and interacting with people. Hey, this one comment you said or thought you had or person you introduced me to was really beneficial. Like, thank you. Like, I love that stuff. So wherever you find me, if you will, would love to connect. Paul H. Graham is really what I'm kind of tagged on, or it's Paul Graham is a handle on Instagram. So that way people can find me, because lo and behold, there's other Paul Grahams in the world. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Paul, thank you so much for being a guest with us. And thank
absolutely.
you, everybody out there who's watching the Fundication show. We're so grateful for the times that we get to connect with you. Any comments that you have or questions, please put them in here. And if Paul doesn't see them and they're specifically for him, we'll forward them on and make sure you get an answer. Thanks for joining us, folks.